Okay, let's dive into this. Imagine this. There's this young guy, Jake Harper. He's 23.
Right.
Just landed a huge job promotion. I mean, you know that feeling, right? On top of the world.
Absolutely. A big moment.
Then suddenly, you fast forward, and he's unconscious, rushed into a really brightly lit emergency room. It's a cold, drizzling night.
Wow, quite the contrast. From celebration to, well, crisis.
Exactly. That stark shift, that's really where our deep dive kicks off today. It all comes from this document we have called Jake2.pds.
Okay.
So our mission really is to piece together what happened, pull out the critical medical insights, and give you the essential knowledge without making it too overwhelming.
Makes sense. That opening scene, the promotion versus the emergency room, it really highlights how unpredictable life can be.
It really does. You picture those flashing lights cutting through the rain, just completely disrupting everything.
Yeah, powerful image.
So the document jumps right into the ambulance,
Yeah.
and there's this brief moment, almost like a flicker of hope. Jake actually regains consciousness for a bit, enough that the paramedics, they feel some initial relief.
Okay, so a positive sign, initially at least.
But then, almost as soon as they get to Riverdale General Hospital, poof, he loses consciousness again.
Ah, so it was temporary. That's concerning.
Yeah, like a quick up and then a much deeper down,
Yeah.
more worry.
Well, that brief consciousness, it's actually quite significant, medically speaking.
How so?
It could suggest maybe a temporary stabilization, but the rapid loss right after, especially upon arrival, that strongly points towards something neurological developing, something urgent.
Which brings us to the ER doc, Dr. Emma Reynolds. She's on duty.
Okay.
The document notes a faint smell of alcohol in Jake's breath.
Right.
And he gives his first vitals. BP 130 over 90, pulse is steady at 68, breathing's a bit slow, 12 breaths a minute, but regular.
Okay, so those numbers, taken alone, they might not immediately scream disaster, right?
That's what I thought. But then Dr. Reynolds spotted a bruise on his left temple.
Ah, okay. That changes things. In the context of altered consciousness, even a faint alcohol smell, that bruise is a huge clue.
The sign of trauma.
Exactly, head trauma. And coupled with him losing consciousness intermittently, that immediately makes you think about potential injury inside the skull.
Right. So she'd be looking for anything pointing to brain issues, I guess.
Precisely. Any sign of increased pressure, neurological deficits, stuff like that.
And then they do the pupil check. Nurse Alex notes, left pupil is mildly dilated. Again, sounds minor, maybe.
Not at all. To a medical professional, that's potentially a very big deal.
Really? Why?
Well, a dilated pupil, especially just one, can indicate rising pressure inside the skull. It might be pressing on the nerve that controls the pupil.
Wow. Yeah.
So you add it all up, the head trauma evidence, the fluctuating consciousness, now the pupil change. It's pointing towards something serious happening quickly.
Which explains why Dr. Reynolds doesn't hesitate. She immediately orders a CT scan.
The right call. You need to see what's going on inside.
The document paints this picture. Jake, under the scanner, you can almost feel the tension.
I bet, waiting for those images.
And Dr. Reynolds spots it on the scan. A hematoma. Growing rapidly.
A bleed.
Yes. Specifically, she identifies it as an epidural hematoma. Blood collecting fast between the skull bone and the dura mater. Now, the dura mater. What is that exactly?
Okay, so the dura mater, think of it like a tough protective bag surrounding the brain and spinal cord. It's the outermost layer of the meninges.
Got it.
In Jake's case, the bleeding is happening just outside that tough layer, in the space between it and the skull itself.
And why is that type epidural so dangerous?
Often, they're caused by a tear in an artery, usually due to a skull fracture nearby. Arterial bleeding is high pressure, so the hematoma can expand very, very quickly.
Like inflating a balloon fast.
Exactly, and that rapidly increasing volume puts immense pressure on the brain tissue. It can cause damage very quickly.
Which is why Dr. Reynolds says, according to the document, we don't have much time, he needs surgery now.
That urgency is absolutely warranted. It's life or death at that point.
So they rush him to surgery. The document says the team acted fast, relieved the pressure.
Thank goodness. Swift surgical intervention, drilling a hole to drain the blood, basically, is often the only way to save someone with a rapidly expanding epidural hematoma.
And it worked. Jake stabilized. The immediate danger, it says, had passed. You just feel this sense of relief reading that part.
Absolutely. A testament to quick diagnosis and skilled surgery. A close call, definitely.
So after the immediate crisis, Dr. Reynolds starts talking to Jake's friends to figure out, the backstory.
Right. How did this all start?
And this is where it gets kind of sobering. Turns out, Jake, who everyone described as usually careful, responsible,
Yeah.
he had accepted a challenge to drink heavily, celebrating that promotion.
Peer pressure. Celebration gone too far.
Seems like it.
Uh-huh.
And then, despite obviously being impaired, he insisted on driving himself home
Oh, no.
on roads that were rainy and slippery.
That's just a recipe for disaster. Alcohol impairing judgment, slowing reactions, plus dangerous conditions.
It's a really stark reminder, isn't it? How quickly good judgment can just, well, evaporate, even for someone normally sensible.
It really is. That combination of factors,
Hmm.
alcohol, the decision to drive, the bad weather, it created such an incredibly high-risk situation. It shows how easily one bad choice, maybe fueled by that celebratory feeling, can lead to just devastating consequences.
Yeah. So the narrative then moves into his recovery, the days, the weeks after surgery.
It's been tough.
For sure. But it highlights the relief, the support from his friends, his family. They were unwavering, it says.
That support system is so crucial after something like this.
And we read about his progress in rehab. Slowly getting back, sitting up, walking, doing daily tasks again. Each step was a huge win.
Absolutely. Recovering from a significant head injury is a long road. Physically, emotionally, it takes incredible determination.
And it's clear this whole thing just profoundly changed him. It wasn't just physical recovery, it was deeper.
You can imagine facing your own mortality, realizing what you almost lost. That tends to shift your perspective dramatically.
And that shift leads him to make this really powerful choice. He decides not to just, move on quietly.
What does he do?
He decides to use this near tragedy for something positive.
Yeah.
He makes this promise to himself, and then he starts speaking out publicly,
Wow.
sharing his story at schools, community events, even local media, talking honestly about the drinking, the driving, the consequences.
That takes incredible courage. To be that vulnerable about a mistake that almost cost him everything?
Doesn't it? But it says his honesty really resonated, especially with young people.
I'm not surprised. Personal stories like that, they hit differently than just hearing statistics or warnings, It makes it real.
Totally. And this commitment, it doesn't just stop at speaking engagements.
No.
He actually founds a nonprofit organization called the Safe Journey Initiative.
Safe Journey Initiative, okay.
Yeah, focused entirely on promoting responsible decision-making, specifically around alcohol and driving.
That's fantastic. Taking that personal experience and building something structured, something lasting.
Exactly. They run workshops, support groups. They even partner with local law enforcement. It's amazing how his one story grew into this whole initiative with real community impact.
It really is. It shows how adversity can genuinely be a catalyst for positive change. And partnering with law enforcement suggests a really comprehensive approach, tackling it from multiple angles.
Yeah, it seems like it became quite influential.
That kind of sustained effort, driven by personal experience, it can make a real difference in changing attitudes and behaviors over time. Jake's continued involvement was probably key.
So the document fast forwards again. Years later, Jake's at the annual Community Safety Conference.
Still advocating.
Still advocating, addressing
Yeah.
this big audience, friends, other survivors, families, community leaders. Everyone's there.
Must have been quite a moment for him.
You imagine so. His message, it says, was about how that darkest night, the night of the accident, actually led him to find his greatest purpose. He delivered it with this steady voice, filled with gratitude.
Wow. Turning it completely around.
And the applause afterwards was significant, like real validation from the community for his journey and his work.
That's powerful. It shows the community recognized the value of what he'd done, the impact he'd made. From near tragedy to, well, a source of hope and prevention.
It really feels like this moment of peace for him, described in the document, an affirmation that, yeah, terrible things can happen, but they can also lead to redemption, to meaningful change.
A remarkable transformation. It speaks volumes about resilience, finding purpose after trauma, and the potential for growth.
So if we boil this all down for you, listening, what are the real key takeaways from Jake's story in this jake2.pdf document?
Well, several things stand out, I think. First, just the fragility of life. How one moment, one decision, especially fueled by impaired judgment, can change everything. Second, the undeniable, potentially devastating consequences of driving under the influence.
Yeah.
It's not abstract. It's real people, real lives.
Yeah.
And third, maybe the most inspiring part, is the human capacity to overcome immense adversity. Not just to survive it, but to find meaning in it and use it to help others.
For me, the big aha moment is that double-edged sword, seeing how easily celebration and bad judgment could have ended in total tragedy.
Hmm.
But then equally, seeing how he took that absolute low point and flipped it, built something positive, this whole Safe Journey initiative that created ripples of good.
Exactly. His story is such a potent illustration of cause and effect, both negative and positive. The impact of choices, but also the power of turning personal pain into public good.
Which brings us to a final thought, something for you to maybe chew on.
Yeah.
Think about your own life. Those moments where choices, maybe big, maybe small, had real consequences. How does hearing about Jake's journey maybe shift your perspective on responsibility, on finding purpose, even when things get incredibly tough? Maybe what role do we all have in sharing what we learn, the hard lessons, to maybe help someone else to make our communities a little better?
That's a great question to leave people with. What's our ripple effect? Definitely something worth considering.